December 17, 1944. 22,000 feet above the Belgian Ardennes, ***. Lieutenant James Harwell's P-47 Thunderbolt shuddered as he rolled into the attack. Below him, a lone Messerschmitt Bf-109 was climbing desperately, trying to reach the cloud layer that hung like dirty cotton 5,000 feet above. The German pilot was making a textbook evasion, banking hard left, then right, never holding one course long enough to give Harwell a stable shot. But Harwell had 89 combat missions behind him. He knew every trick, every desperate maneuver a dying pilot could try. He adjusted his throttle, leading the target exactly as he'd done dozens of times before. His finger rested on the trigger. The gunsight's illuminated reticle tracked the Bf-109 with mechanical precision. 2 seconds more. Maybe 3. Then the Messerschmitt would be close enough for a killing burst. 650 caliber machine guns converging at 300 yards, 3,600 rounds per minute turning aluminum and flesh into falling debris. But in that moment, something changed. The German pilot made a mistake. Perhaps his engine was damaged. Perhaps he panicked. He rolled wings level for just an instant, turning his cockpit directly toward Harwell. The morning sun, breaking through the overcast, illuminated the Bf-109's canopy perfectly. And through that clear canopy, at a distance of perhaps 250 yards, James Harwell saw something he had never seen before in 89 missions. He saw a face. Not a silhouette. Not a shape behind armored glass. A face. Young, clean-shaven, eyes wide with fear. Blonde hair pressed down by a leather flying helmet. Oxygen mask hanging loose. The German pilot's mouth was open, shouting something, screaming something, praying something. His hands were visible on the control stick, knuckles white with desperate pressure. Harwell's finger was on the trigger. The convergence was perfect. But he hesitated. That hesitation, barely 2 seconds long, would haunt James Harwell for the rest of his life. Not because of what happened next, but because of what it revealed about himself. About what 89 missions had done to him. About what he had become in the skies over Europe and what he had lost without realizing he was losing it. This is not a story about heroism or cowardice. It's a story about the moment one man discovered that somewhere between his first combat mission and his 89th, he had learned to kill without seeing. And about what happened when he finally saw. James Harwell learned to kill in the summer of 1943, at a training field outside Phoenix, Arizona. He was 22 years old. He had grown up in Portland, Oregon, where his father ran a hardware store and his mother taught piano lessons to neighborhood children. Before the war, he had planned to study engineering at Oregon State. When Pearl Harbor happened, he joined the Army Air Forces the way thousands of other young men did, with a mixture of patriotic conviction and adolescent excitement about flying machines that seemed romantic and heroic from a distance. The training was methodical. First came basic flight instruction in PT-19s, gentle aircraft that forgave mistakes. Then at 6 Texans, faster and less forgiving. Then finally P-47 Thunderbolts, 7-ton fighters with 2,000 horsepower engines and enough firepower to disintegrate a locomotive. His instructors taught him how to lead a target, how to calculate deflection angles, how to manage ammunition expenditure. They drilled these skills until they became automatic reflexes. But they didn't teach him how to see the human being he would kill. That lesson was deliberately omitted. The rhetoric of training focused on destroying enemy aircraft, not killing enemy pilots. Instructors used language that created distance. Targets instead of men. Bogies instead of pilots. Splash one instead of kill. This linguistic buffer wasn't accidental. Military psychologists had learned, through bitter experience in previous wars, that men who saw their enemies as fully human often couldn't kill them effectively. The brain created barriers. Hesitation. Doubt. Empathy. So the barriers were removed during training. Harwell practiced shooting at towed targets, fabric sleeves pulled through the sky by other aircraft. He practiced on ground targets, old vehicles placed in the Nevada desert. He practiced on aerial silhouettes, painted profiles of German and Japanese aircraft. He learned to recognize a Bf-109 by its elliptical wings and short fuselage. He learned to identify an FW-190 by its radial engine and distinctive cowling. He learned which angles offered the best shot, which deflection corrections to make, how long to hold the trigger down. But he never saw a face. When Harwell arrived in England in March 1944, assigned to the 362nd Fighter Squadron, he carried this training with him. The veteran pilots he met, men who had already flown 50, 60, 70 missions, spoke about aerial combat in the same detached language his instructors had used. They traded stories about getting a kill, the way hunters might discuss bagging a deer. The language reinforced the distance. Enemy pilots weren't people with families and fears and futures. They were scores, statistics, numbers painted on fuselage sides. Harwell's first combat mission came on March 19, 1944. An escort mission for B-17 bombers attacking railroad yards near Frankfurt. He remembers the nervousness before takeoff, the way his hands shook slightly as he strapped into the cockpit. The flight to the target was tense but uneventful. German fighters appeared only briefly, engaging the high squadron before diving away. Harwell fired his guns at extreme range, saw his tracers arc into empty sky, and returned to base without ever getting close enough to actually threaten an enemy aircraft. His squadron leader congratulated him on a good first mission. Harwell felt relieved but also oddly disappointed. He had expected something more dramatic, more definitive. The combat had been distant and impersonal, like shooting at the towed targets in Arizona except with real people somewhere far away, too far to see clearly. His first confirmed kill came 3 weeks later. It was April 8, 1944. Another bomber escort, this time to Brunswick. The formation was attacked by a group of Bf-109s, perhaps 30 German fighters diving from high altitude in a coordinated assault. The sky erupted into chaos. Aircraft wheeling, tracers streaming, radio discipline collapsing into overlapping shouts of warning and position calls. Harwell found himself behind a Bf-109 that had just broken off from an attack on a bomber. The German pilot hadn't seen him. Harwell closed to 200 yards, centered the gunsight reticle on the enemy fighter's fuselage, and pressed the trigger. His 6 machine guns roared. The Bf-109 exploded. One moment it was an intact aircraft. The next it was tumbling fragments, wings separating, fuselage breaking apart, fuel igniting in an orange-black fireball. Harwell rolled away, climbed back to altitude, rejoined his flight. When they landed 3 hours later, his squadron leader confirmed the kill. Gun camera footage showed the Bf-109's destruction. Harwell was congratulated. Men slapped his shoulder. Someone bought him a drink at the officers' club. But what Harwell remembered most clearly wasn't the congratulations or the drink. It was how impersonal the whole experience had been. He hadn't seen the pilot. Not at the moment of firing, not when the aircraft exploded, not afterward. The Bf-109 had just been a shape in his gunsight, a target that he destroyed efficiently and effectively. He felt satisfaction, pride even. But no horror. No revulsion. The killing had felt clinical, mechanical. Like pressing a button on a machine. This was what his training had prepared him for. Over the next 8 months, Harwell flew 88 more missions. He became an ace, credited with 7 confirmed victories. He learned to anticipate enemy maneuvers, to position himself advantageously, to kill efficiently. He became good at his job. Very good. The squadron commander mentioned him as a candidate for promotion to captain. Other pilots asked him for tactical advice. But he never saw a face. The enemy remained abstract. Shapes in his gunsight. Scores in his logbook. Aircraft falling away in flames or spinning down trailing smoke. He knew intellectually that each destroyed fighter meant a dead man, sometimes a man who burned alive, sometimes a man whose body was torn apart by 50 caliber rounds, sometimes a man who fell 20,000 feet without a parachute. But that knowledge remained intellectual. Distant. Theoretical. Until December 17, 1944. The mission briefing that morning had been routine. Fighters sweep over the Ardennes, covering the northern flank of what intelligence was calling unusual German activity near the Belgian-German border. Weather was marginal, broken clouds at multiple altitudes, visibility limited, chance of icing above 15,000 feet. The group would fly in 2 flights of 6 aircraft each, sweeping east from the Rhine to the Meuse. Harwell commanded the second flight. He had done this before, many times. The responsibility no longer made him nervous. He knew the radio frequencies, the rendezvous points, the emergency procedures. He knew how his wingmen flew, knew which pilots were aggressive and which were cautious, knew how to position them for mutual support. They took off at 0742 hours. The sky was overcast, heavy with winter clouds that promised snow. The temperature at altitude would be well below zero. Harwell pulled on his leather jacket over his flight suit, checked his oxygen mask connection, adjusted his seat to a comfortable position. His crew chief gave him a thumbs up from the tarmac. The engine coughed, settled into a smooth roar. 42 minutes later, they were at 22,000 feet, flying east over Luxembourg. The clouds below were thick enough to hide the ground completely. Above, the sky was clear, hard blue winter light, painfully bright. Radio chatter was minimal. Everyone's attention was focused on scanning for enemy aircraft. At 0835, they turned south, following the briefed route. This brought them parallel to the German lines. Intelligence had reported increased Luftwaffe activity in this sector over the past week. Several bomber groups had been hit hard by aggressive German fighters. The mission was partly reconnaissance, partly area denial, let the Germans know that American fighters controlled this airspace. The German pilot appeared without warning. One moment, the sky ahead was empty. The next, a Bf-109 emerged from a cloud layer below, climbing steeply. He must have been trying to gain altitude, perhaps planning to attack Allied aircraft further west. He was alone, no wingman, no supporting flight. Just one pilot in one aircraft, climbing desperately toward the only cover available, the cloud layer above. Harwell called it out immediately. Bogey, 11 o'clock low, climbing, type Bf-109, one aircraft. His flight reacted smoothly. They had practiced this. Harwell broke left, diving toward the German fighter. His wingmen stayed high, covering from above. The other four aircraft fanned out, ensuring no other Germans were hiding nearby. The Bf-109 pilot saw them immediately. He had to. 6 P-47s diving out of the sun would be impossible to miss. He rolled hard left, trying to extend away, but he was too slow, too low. The energy advantage belonged entirely to Harwell. He adjusted his dive angle, leading the target precisely. His airspeed built quickly. 300 miles per hour. 350 / 400 /. The Thunderbolt was heavy and fast, and gravity was helping him close the distance. The German pilot tried everything. He rolled right, then snapped back left. He pulled up sharply, then pushed over into a split S. He was good, Harwell could tell that immediately. These weren't panicked maneuvers. They were calculated, precise, the actions of someone who had survived enough combat to know what worked. But they weren't enough. Harwell cut inside each turn, maintaining the pursuit. He was patient. No need to force a difficult shot. Just stay in position, maintain the pressure, wait for the inevitable mistake. The Bf-109's engine was smoking slightly, probably damaged, possibly from an earlier engagement. That would explain why the pilot was alone. He'd been separated from his formation, was trying to return to base, had climbed when he should have stayed low and hidden. The chase lasted perhaps 40 seconds. To Harwell, it felt much longer. Every detail registered with perfect clarity. The way the winter light reflected off the Bf-109's camouflage pattern. The vapor trail streaming from the damaged engine. The way the aircraft shuddered slightly during each hard turn, suggesting control problems. Then the German pilot made his mistake. He rolled wings level. Just for an instant. Perhaps he was checking his 6 o'clock. Perhaps his damaged aircraft couldn't maintain the hard turn. Perhaps he simply made a decision error, prioritizing speed over evasion. The reason didn't matter. The result did. The Bf-109's cockpit turned directly toward Harwell. The distance was perfect, about 250 yards, exactly the range where his guns converged. The sun broke through the overcast at precisely that moment, illuminating the German aircraft with sharp, crystalline light. And through the clear canopy, through the greenhouse windscreen of the Bf-109, James Harwell saw a face. The pilot was young. Early 20s at most. Blonde hair pressed down by his leather flying helmet. No oxygen mask, it had fallen away, suggesting a damaged oxygen system. His face was turned toward Harwell, eyes wide with the recognition of imminent death. His mouth was open. He was shouting something or screaming something or praying something. Harwell could see the pilot's hands on the control stick. White knuckles. Desperate pressure. The German was pulling hard, trying to force the damaged aircraft into one more evasion. But the Bf-109 wasn't responding fast enough. The roll rate was too slow. The turn was too gentle. Harwell's gunsight was perfectly aligned. His finger was on the trigger. 650 caliber machine guns were loaded, armed, ready. Convergence was perfect. Range was perfect. The German pilot was helpless, damaged, alone. This was exactly the situation Harwell had been trained to exploit. A clean kill. An easy kill. But he saw the face. And he hesitated. The hesitation lasted 2 seconds. Perhaps less. Time compressed in combat the way it always did, moments stretching, seconds feeling like minutes. But objectively, measured by the clock, Harwell's finger paused on the trigger for approximately 2 seconds. In those 2 seconds, the Bf-109 completed its turn. The pilot, somehow, impossibly, managed to roll the damaged aircraft 90 degrees. The cockpit turned away. The face disappeared. The German fighter dove toward the cloud layer below, trailing black smoke, damaged but still flying. Harwell's wingman called out over the radio. "Lead, you had him." What happened? Harwell didn't answer immediately. He was staring at the spot where the Bf-109 had disappeared into the clouds. The face was still there in his mind. Young. Terrified. Human. He pressed the transmit button. Lost sight in the clouds. Breaking off pursuit. It was a lie. He hadn't lost sight. He had seen perfectly. He had simply chosen not to fire. His wingmen didn't question the call. They reformed, rejoined the flight, continued the sweep. The rest of the mission was uneventful. They returned to base 90 minutes later, landed, debriefed. Harwell filed his mission report, describing the encounter with the Bf-109, noting that the enemy aircraft escaped into cloud cover. The intelligence officer accepted this without comment. Cloud evasion was common. No one suspected anything unusual had happened. But something unusual had happened. In his quarters that evening, Harwell sat on his bunk and tried to understand what had occurred. He had killed 7 men in aerial combat. 7 confirmed victories. Perhaps more that had been damaged but not confirmed. He had done this without hesitation, without doubt, without emotional difficulty. The enemy had always been abstract, shapes in his gunsight, aircraft to be destroyed, threats to be eliminated. But that morning over Belgium, the abstraction had collapsed. For 2 seconds, James Harwell had seen a human being. Not a target. Not a bogey. A person. A young man, probably German, probably conscripted, probably fighting for reasons he might not fully support, probably afraid, certainly about to die. A person with a face, with eyes, with an expression that communicated fear and desperate hope and a terrible understanding that comes when you realize your life is about to end. Harwell had seen that. And he hadn't been able to pull the trigger. The recognition was deeply disturbing. It suggested that something fundamental had changed. Before that moment, Harwell had believed himself to be an effective fighter pilot, someone who could separate emotion from duty, someone who could kill when necessary without being paralyzed by empathy. That self-image had just been shattered. He had hesitated. At the critical moment, when everything had aligned perfectly, when training and instinct should have taken over, he had been unable to complete the kill. Was this weakness? Cowardice? Combat fatigue? Or was it something else entirely? He remembered his first confirmed kill, the Bf-109 over Brunswick that had exploded in flames. He remembered feeling satisfaction, pride. He had destroyed an enemy aircraft. He had done his job. There had been no moral complexity, no troubling questions. Just mechanical efficiency. But that morning over Belgium had revealed the lie embedded in that mechanical efficiency. The Bf-109 over Brunswick hadn't just been an aircraft. It had been an aircraft with a pilot. A person. Someone who had lived a life, who had family somewhere, who had fears and hopes and dreams. Someone who had died in flames because James Harwell had pressed a trigger. That knowledge had always been present, intellectually. But it had remained abstract. Theoretical. The face in the gunsight had made it concrete. Real. Undeniable. Harwell realized that what had changed wasn't his ability to kill. What had changed was his inability to ignore what killing actually meant. For 8 months, he had functioned successfully because he had been able to maintain psychological distance. The training had worked. The language had worked. The abstraction had worked. He had killed without truly seeing. But now he had seen. And he couldn't unsee. Over the next week, Harwell flew 4 more missions. Each time, he found himself scanning not just for enemy aircraft but for faces. Every engagement, even at maximum range, even at distances where individual features were impossible to distinguish, he found himself imagining the pilot in the other cockpit. Imagining their fear. Their desperation. Their humanity. On December 22nd, he got another perfect shot, a FW-190 climbing through scattered clouds, completely unaware of Harwell's approach. The tactical situation was identical to the encounter over Belgium. Perfect convergence. Perfect range. Defenseless enemy. Harwell lined up the shot. His finger touched the trigger. He saw the FW-190's cockpit, saw the suggestion of movement inside, saw the canopy reflecting winter sunlight. And again, he hesitated. The moment passed. The FW-190 entered the clouds, escaped. Harwell's wingman said nothing over the radio, but Harwell knew he had seen. Word would spread. Questions would be asked. That evening, the squadron commander called him into his office. Major William Kessler was 31 years old, which made him ancient by fighter pilot standards. He had flown in North Africa, in Sicily, in Italy, and now in Northern Europe. He had 17 confirmed kills. He had also lost count of how many pilots under his command had died. His face showed the strain, permanent lines around his eyes, a hardness in his expression that hadn't been there in photographs from 1942 /. He gestured for Harwell to sit. Tell me what's happening. Harwell considered lying. He could claim mechanical problems, damaged gunsight, oxygen issues. But he looked at Kessler's face and realized the major already knew. I saw his face, sir. Kessler nodded slowly. Which one? December 17th. The 109 over the Ardennes. And now you can't stop seeing faces. It wasn't a question. Harwell nodded. Kessler was quiet for a long moment. Then he leaned back in his chair. You want to know something? I see them too. Every single one. The first German I killed, I was so close I could see his expression through the canopy. Surprise. That's what I remember. He looked surprised. Like he couldn't believe this was happening to him. He paused. The second one, I saw him trying to get out. He was on fire and he was trying to get the canopy open and I just kept firing. Because that's what you do. You don't let them escape to kill your friends tomorrow. So I kept firing and he burned. Kessler's voice was completely flat. Emotionless. But his hands were gripping the desk edge with enough force that his knuckles were white. The third one, the fourth one, all the rest, I saw every single face. Do you understand what I'm telling you, Lieutenant? I didn't stop seeing them. I learned to kill anyway. Harwell felt something cold settle in his stomach. How? You just do. You understand that the person in that cockpit would kill you without hesitation. Would kill your wingman. Would strafe a B-17 full of kids from Kansas who never wanted to be here either. So you pull the trigger because that's the job. That's war. You don't get to choose which parts are clean and which parts are ugly. Kessler stood up, walked to the window. Outside, mechanics were preparing aircraft for the next day's missions. But here's what the training doesn't tell you, Lieutenant. Here's what nobody talks about in those officers' club conversations where pilots brag about their kills. Every face stays with you. Every single one. You'll be 70 years old and you'll still see them. That's the price. He turned back to face Harwell. So you have a choice to make. Either you learn to kill despite seeing faces, or you request a transfer to a non-combat role. There's no shame in it. Plenty of men reach a point where they can't do this anymore. Combat fatigue, they call it. Operational exhaustion. The brass will quietly reassign you somewhere safe, and no one will think less of you. Harwell thought about this. About returning to the United States. About a training command position somewhere in Arizona or Texas. About spending the rest of the war teaching new pilots the same lies he had been taught, that killing could be mechanical, impersonal, abstract. About never having to see another face. But he also thought about his wingmen, about the other pilots in his flight, about the B-17 crews flying unescorted into Germany because there weren't enough fighter escorts to cover every mission. "I'll keep flying, sir." Kessler studied him for a long moment. "You understand what that means? You're choosing to kill people whose faces you can see." "Yes, sir. That's harder than anything you've done so far." "I know, sir." Kessler nodded. Dismissed. Harwell flew the next mission on December 24, Christmas Eve. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. They were going to spend the day before Christmas trying to kill German pilots who were probably preparing for their own Christmas celebrations. The mission was a bomber escort to Frankfurt. Heavy flak expected. German fighters definitely expected. Harwell's flight would cover the high squadron, the most vulnerable position. German fighters attacked 30 minutes before reaching the target. A group of Bf-109s, perhaps 20 aircraft, diving from 28,000 feet in a coordinated assault. The sky erupted into the familiar chaos, aircraft turning, tracers streaming, radio calls overlapping. Harwell found himself in a one-on-one engagement with a Bf-109. The German pilot was good, better than most. He anticipated Harwell's moves, countered each attack, forced Harwell to work for every advantage. The fight spiraled downward from 25,000 feet to 18,000, then to 15,000 /. Both pilots were committed now, locked in a duel that one of them wouldn't survive. At 12,000 feet, Harwell finally gained position. The Bf-109 tried a last desperate scissors maneuver, but fuel or damage or simple exhaustion slowed the Germans' reactions. Harwell got inside the turn, pulled lead, aligned his gun sight. And again, for just an instant, he could see into the cockpit. Could see the pilot's profile. Could see his hands on the controls, his head checking 6 o'clock, his awareness that death was about to arrive from behind and above. But this time, Harwell didn't hesitate. He pressed the trigger. 650 caliber machine guns fired. Tracers walked up the Bf-109's fuselage. The canopy shattered. The aircraft shuddered, rolled inverted, began falling. Harwell pulled up, climbed away, rejoined his flight. His hands were shaking. His heart was hammering. He had just chosen to kill someone whose face he could see. Had chosen to pull a trigger knowing exactly what that trigger would do to a human being. The Bf-109 fell into the clouds below, trailing smoke. Harwell never saw whether the pilot got out. That evening, back at the base, he didn't join the other pilots at the officers' club. He sat in his quarters and tried to process what had happened. He had crossed a threshold. Before today, he had killed in abstraction. Then, briefly, he had been paralyzed by seeing the reality of what killing meant. Now he had killed with full awareness. With his eyes open. With complete understanding. It felt different from every other kill in his logbook. There was no satisfaction, no pride. Just a hollow acknowledgement of necessity. He had chosen to be the person who killed rather than the person who died. He had made that choice consciously, deliberately, with full knowledge of its meaning. Was that better or worse than killing in abstraction? He didn't know. But he knew he had changed in a fundamental way. The pilot who had arrived in England in March 1944, eager and naive, was gone. The pilot who had accumulated 7 kills with mechanical efficiency was also gone. What remained was someone who understood exactly what war required and who had decided to meet that requirement despite its cost. Harwell flew 23 more combat missions before the war ended in May 1945 /. He achieved 4 more confirmed victories, bringing his total to 11. He was promoted to captain. He was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross for extraordinary achievement in aerial combat. But the language of the citation meant nothing to him. He knew what he had done. He had chosen, repeatedly, to kill people whose humanity he could see. Each time, it became slightly easier mechanically, the training reasserted itself, the reflexes took over, the task got completed. But emotionally, it never became easier. Each face stayed with him. The other pilots noticed the change. Harwell had always been competent but relatively cheerful, someone who could laugh at mess hall jokes and participate in the casual camaraderie that helped men survive the stress of combat flying. Now he was quiet, withdrawn. He flew his missions with technical precision but without the aggressive enthusiasm that characterized successful fighter pilots. In March 1945, a new replacement pilot arrived at the squadron. His name was Lieutenant Robert Mitchell, fresh from training, eager to prove himself. He had that same naive enthusiasm Harwell remembered from his own first days in combat. Mitchell asked Harwell for advice, how to spot enemy fighters, how to execute effective attacks, how to become an ace. Harwell took him aside one evening. "I'm going to tell you something they don't teach in training. When you get close enough for a good shot, you'll be able to see into their cockpit. You'll see them. Their faces. Their hands on the controls. You'll see them as people." Mitchell looked uncomfortable. "What do I do when that happens?" "You have two choices. Either you kill them anyway, knowing exactly what you're doing. Or you don't, and you risk dying yourself or getting someone else killed. Which one is right?" Harwell shook his head. "I don't know. I honestly don't know. I can tell you what I do. I pull the trigger. Because I've decided that staying alive is more important than staying clean. But I can't tell you if that's right." Mitchell flew his first combat mission 2 days later. He got a clear shot at a FW-190, perfect convergence, perfect range. He hesitated. The German escaped. Mitchell returned to base shaken, convinced he had failed. Harwell found him in the barracks that evening. Mitchell was staring at the wall, not moving. "Did you see his face?" Harwell asked. Mitchell nodded. "Did he get away?" "Yes." "Did you survive?" "Yes." "Then you didn't fail. You just learned the hardest lesson of this war. The people we're killing are people. Not targets. People. That lesson will either destroy you or make you into someone who can survive this with your humanity intact." Mitchell looked at him. "You've killed 11 of them. How did you survive it?" Harwell considered this. "I'm not sure I have." The conversation haunted Harwell. He realized that he had become part of the same system that had trained him, teaching new pilots to kill, preparing them for the psychological reality of aerial combat, helping them cross the same threshold he had crossed. But was he helping them or destroying them? Was he preparing them for survival or initiating them into a form of spiritual death? He didn't have answers. What he had instead was the face from December 17th. The German pilot over the Ardennes. Young, terrified, human. That face had become emblematic of all the others, the ones Harwell had killed before seeing them, the ones he had killed after seeing them, the ones he would kill in the remaining weeks of the war. The German from December 17th had escaped. Harwell often wondered about him. Had he made it back to his base? Had he survived subsequent missions? Had he been killed later by some other American pilot who didn't hesitate? Was he alive somewhere now, in May 1945, trying to rebuild his life in a destroyed Germany? Or had Harwell's hesitation simply delayed his death by weeks rather than preventing it entirely? There was no way to know. But Harwell found himself hoping that the German had survived. That the 2-second hesitation had meant something. That one face, at least, had been spared. The war ended on May 8, 1945 /. Harwell was in England when the announcement came. There were celebrations, men drinking, shouting, laughing with relief and joy. The shooting was over. They had survived. They were going home. Harwell participated in the celebrations because it seemed expected. But he felt disconnected from the joy around him. The war was over for everyone else. For him, it continued in his memory, 11 faces, endless variations on fear and desperation and death. He returned to the United States in June 1945 /. The Army Air Forces offered him a commission in the peacetime service, suggesting he could have a career in military aviation. He declined. He was done with flying, done with combat, done with having other people's lives in his gunsight. He returned to Portland. His parents held a welcome home dinner. Friends from before the war came by to congratulate him. They asked about his experiences, about what it was like to be a fighter ace, about whether combat was as exciting as it seemed in the newsreels. He gave them the answers they wanted to hear. He talked about the technical aspects of flying the P-47. He described the landscape of Europe from 20,000 feet. He mentioned the cold, the fear, the relief of landing safely after each mission. He didn't mention the faces. No one asked whether he had killed anyone. The question would have been rude, inappropriate for polite conversation. So the killing remained unspoken, invisible, present in everything he didn't say. He enrolled at Oregon State in the fall of 1945, finally pursuing the engineering degree he had planned before the war. The campus was full of returning veterans, men who had fought in Europe or the Pacific or both. They recognized each other, something in the eyes, in the way they carried themselves, in what they didn't talk about. Harwell threw himself into his studies. Engineering problems had clear answers, mathematical solutions. You calculated stress tolerances, thermal expansions, load-bearing capacities. The equations didn't judge you. They didn't ask about your past. They just required precision and logic. But at night, when he tried to sleep, the faces returned. Not just the 11 he had killed. All of them. The German from December 17 who had escaped. The FW-190 pilot from December 22 whom he had let escape. Every enemy pilot he had engaged, whether he killed them or not. They appeared in his dreams, sometimes individually, sometimes all at once, sometimes speaking in German he couldn't understand, sometimes just staring at him with those wide, terrified eyes. He would wake up at 3 in the morning, heart pounding, hands shaking. Then he would sit in the dark and try to convince himself that he had made the right choices. That the war had been necessary. That his killing had been justified. That he wasn't a murderer. Some nights, he succeeded in convincing himself. Other nights, he failed. He graduated with his engineering degree in 1949 /. He got a job with Boeing, working on commercial aircraft design. The irony wasn't lost on him, spending his days designing passenger planes after spending the war shooting down fighters. But the work was satisfying. He was creating instead of destroying. Building instead of killing. He met Sarah in 1951 /. She was a secretary at Boeing, smart and practical and completely uninterested in war stories. That was partly why he married her. She didn't ask about his combat experience. She didn't want to know his kill count. She saw him as the man he was in 1951, not the man he had been in 1944 /. They had 2 children, a boy and a girl. Harwell threw himself into being a father. He taught his son to fish, to camp, to work with his hands. He taught his daughter to read, to question, to think critically. He tried to give them the innocence he had lost, the belief that the world could be good. He never told them he had killed 11 men. Perhaps more if you counted the damaged aircraft that might have crashed after he lost visual contact. He never told them about the faces. About the young German pilot over the Ardennes whom he had let escape. About the Christmas Eve when he chose to cross a threshold he could never uncross. His son asked him once, casually, at dinner, "Dad, did you shoot down any German planes?" Harwell looked at his son, 12 years old, innocent, asking the question the way a child might ask about any past experience. "Yes," he said. "I did." "How many?" 11 confirmed. His son's eyes went wide. "That's so cool. You're a hero." Harwell set down his fork. "No. I'm not a hero. I did what I had to do. That's all." His wife gave him a sharp look. She understood that this was forbidden territory. "That's enough war talk. Who wants dessert?" His son let it drop. But Harwell saw the confusion in his face. Why wouldn't his father want to talk about being a fighter ace? Why wasn't he proud? How could Harwell explain? How could he tell his 12-year-old son that heroism was a lie, that killing left stains that never washed away, that every face stayed with you forever? How could he describe what it felt like to see a human being's terror and then choose to end their life? He couldn't. So he said nothing. The silence became his default response. When people learned he had been a fighter pilot, they would ask questions. He would give brief, factual answers and then change the subject. When veteran organizations invited him to speak at schools or community centers, he declined. When historians working on books about the 362nd Fighter Squadron contacted him, asking for interviews, he politely refused. He wanted to leave the war behind. But the war wouldn't leave him behind. In 1968, Harwell's daughter brought home a boyfriend named Michael. He was 22, a graduate student at the University of Washington studying political science. He was also a vocal opponent of the Vietnam War. At dinner, Michael talked passionately about the immorality of American intervention in Southeast Asia. About the bombing campaigns that were killing civilians. About the soldiers who were being turned into killers by their government. About the need to refuse to participate in an unjust war. Harwell listened in silence. His son, now 26 and working as a lawyer, argued back, defending American policy. His wife tried to change the subject. But Michael was passionate, committed, unable to stop. The problem, Michael said, is that we've created a military system that dehumanizes the enemy. That teaches young men to kill without thinking about what they're doing. That turns war into an abstraction. We need soldiers who see the humanity in their enemies, who refuse to kill just because they're ordered to. Harwell set down his fork. That's easy to say when you've never been in combat. Michael turned to him. With respect, sir, that's exactly the problem. Veterans like you were taught not to question orders, not to think critically about what you were doing. You became part of a killing machine. Something cold settled into Harwell's chest. You think I didn't see the humanity in my enemies? I think the military trains people not to see it. That's how they get ordinary men to commit extraordinary violence. Harwell was quiet for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice completely flat. On December 17, 1944, I was at 22,000 feet over Belgium. I had a perfect shot on a German fighter. Perfect convergence, perfect range. The pilot was damaged, alone, defenseless. I could see his face. Young, terrified, completely human. And I hesitated. For 2 seconds, I couldn't pull the trigger because I saw his humanity too clearly. The table had gone completely silent. 1 week later, I had another perfect shot. Different pilot, same situation. This time I didn't hesitate. I chose to kill him, knowing exactly what I was doing, seeing his face, understanding his humanity completely. I pulled the trigger anyway. And I've lived with that choice for 24 years. He looked directly at Michael. So don't tell me about dehumanization. Don't tell me about not seeing humanity. I saw it. Every time. 11 faces. I killed them anyway because that was the alternative to dying myself. You think you'd do differently? You think you'd let yourself be killed to preserve your moral purity? Michael had gone pale. I didn't know. No. You didn't. Harwell stood up. Excuse me. He left the table, went outside, stood in the dark backyard trying to control the shaking in his hands. The faces were there again. All of them. The German from December 17th who had escaped. The German from Christmas Eve whom he had killed. All the others. His wife came out after a few minutes. She put her hand on his shoulder. You've never talked about it before. I know. Maybe you should have. Maybe. They stood together in the dark. After a while, Harwell said quietly, do you think I was wrong? To kill them? I think you did what you had to do to survive. That's not the same thing. No. It's not. Inside, he could hear Michael apologizing to his daughter. Hear his son trying to smooth things over. The dinner continued without him. But something had broken open. The silence he had maintained for 24 years had cracked. Over the next weeks, Harwell found himself thinking more about the war than he had in years. About the German pilot from December 17th. About all the others. About the choices he had made and what those choices had cost him. He realized that he had been trying to pretend the war had never happened. That by refusing to talk about it, by refusing to acknowledge it, he could somehow make it less real. But the faces in his dreams knew better. The war was always real. Always present. In 1969, he did something he had avoided for 25 years. He contacted the Air Force Historical Research Agency and requested access to his mission reports and combat records from 1944-1945 /. The documents arrived 6 weeks later, hundreds of pages of reports, intelligence summaries, after-action reviews. He read through them systematically, matching dates and locations to his memories. December 17, 1944 / Fighter sweep over the Ardennes. Contact with single Bf-109. Enemy aircraft escaped into clouds. December 24, 1944 / Bomber escort to Frankfurt. Multiple engagements. 1 Bf-109 confirmed destroyed. The reports were dry, factual, bureaucratic. They described tactical situations and outcomes. They said nothing about faces. Nothing about fear. Nothing about the cost of killing or the weight of survival. But reading them, Harwell found himself remembering details he thought he had forgotten. The temperature that morning over Belgium. The sound of his engine. The way the sun had broken through the clouds at exactly the wrong moment, illuminating the German pilot's face with perfect clarity. He realized that he remembered every detail of that encounter. Every second. The memory was as vivid as if it had happened yesterday. It would always be vivid. Time didn't dull it. Distance didn't soften it. The moment when he saw that face and chose not to kill would remain with him forever. And strangely, that realization brought him a measure of peace. Not relief, not forgiveness, but peace. He had made a choice in that moment. A good choice, possibly the only good choice he had made during the entire war. He had seen a human being and chosen mercy over efficiency. Even knowing that choice might cost him. Even knowing the tactical disadvantage it created. For 2 seconds, James Harwell had refused to be the killing machine his training had created. He had been fully human, fully aware, fully present. And that 2-second hesitation had changed everything that came after. James Harwell died in 1994, at the age of 73. Heart failure, quick and relatively painless. His children were with him at the end. So was his wife of 43 years. Among his effects, his son found a journal Harwell had kept sporadically over the years. Most entries were mundane, notes about work projects, family events, household repairs. But scattered throughout were passages about the war. About specific missions. About specific moments. One entry, dated December 17, 1969, exactly 25 years after the encounter over Belgium, read: I've been thinking about the German pilot again. The one I let escape. I've spent 25 years wondering whether I was right to hesitate. Whether that hesitation was wisdom or weakness. Whether I saved his life or merely delayed his death. I don't know if he survived the war. I don't know his name. I don't even know what unit he flew with. But I hope he lived. I hope he went home to Germany, married, had children, built a life. I hope my hesitation meant something. What I do know is this: that moment changed me. Before that day, I thought I could kill cleanly, mechanically, without moral cost. After that day, I understood what killing actually meant. I made a conscious choice to continue killing because the alternative was dying. But I never again killed without knowing exactly what I was doing. Was that better? I don't know. Perhaps it was worse, choosing to do something terrible with full awareness rather than doing it in abstraction. But at least it was honest. At least I didn't hide behind distance and language and training. At least I owned what I did. The faces still come in dreams. All 11 of them. And the one I didn't kill. They look at me with those same wide, terrified eyes. Sometimes I try to explain my choices to them. Sometimes I just accept their judgment. But the German from December 17th, his face is different in my dreams. He doesn't look terrified. He looks grateful. And that's the only comfort I have. Harwell's son kept the journal. He never showed it to anyone, but he read it occasionally, trying to understand his father. Trying to understand what war had cost the quiet, withdrawn man who had taught him to fish and never talked about being a fighter ace. He learned, slowly, that heroism was more complicated than he had imagined as a 12-year-old boy. That survival often came at a cost that couldn't be measured in medals or commendations. That the true price of war wasn't counted in casualties but in the faces that haunted the survivors. In 2004, on what would have been Harwell's 83rd birthday, his son attended a reunion of the 362nd Fighter Squadron. Only a handful of men were still alive, former pilots now in their 80s, gathering to remember friends long dead and missions long past. One of them was Major William Kessler, the squadron commander who had counseled Harwell after the December 17 incident. Kessler was 92, using a walker, but still sharp. Harwell's son introduced himself, mentioned his father's name. Kessler's eyes went distant for a moment, remembering. Jim Harwell. Good pilot. Better man. He was one of the few who understood what it cost to do what we did. He never talked about the war much. None of us did. How could we? How do you explain to people who weren't there that killing is a choice you make knowing it will destroy part of yourself? That mercy is sometimes the hardest form of courage. That the faces never leave you. Kessler paused, then said quietly, "Your father saved a German pilot's life once. December 17, 1944 /. He had a perfect shot and he let the man escape. He thought I didn't know about it, but I did. The gun camera footage showed everything, including the hesitation. Did you discipline him? No. I understood what had happened. He had seen too clearly. That's not a failure. That's humanity asserting itself despite everything designed to suppress it. I was proud of him for that moment. And proud of him for flying the next mission anyway." The old man was quiet for a moment. "We did terrible things in that war. Necessary things, but terrible. Your father understood that more clearly than most. He carried that burden with dignity and honesty. That's rare." Harwell's son thought about this for a long time. About his father's silence. About the faces that had haunted him for 50 years. About the German pilot who might have lived because one American fighter pilot hesitated for 2 seconds on a winter morning over Belgium. He realized that heroism wasn't what he had imagined as a child. It wasn't about kill counts or medals or dramatic victories. It was about maintaining your humanity in circumstances designed to destroy it. About seeing clearly and acting anyway. About carrying the weight of your choices without pretending they were weightless. His father had been a hero. Not despite his hesitation, but because of it. Because in that moment, James Harwell had refused to kill blindly. Had insisted on seeing, on knowing, on acknowledging the cost of war. And then, having seen and known and acknowledged, he had chosen to continue fighting. Not because killing was easy or clean or glorious, but because someone had to do it and he had decided to be the one who bore that burden with open eyes. That was courage. That was sacrifice. That was the kind of heroism that never made it into newsreels or recruitment posters. The kind that left faces in dreams and journals filled with guilt and questions without answers. The kind that mattered. The face James Harwell saw on December 17, 1944, belonged to a German pilot named Klaus Zimmermann. He was 23 years old, a lieutenant in Jägerschwader II, flying his 48th combat mission. His engine had been damaged by anti-aircraft fire during a previous engagement. He was trying to return to his base near Bonn when he encountered Harwell's flight. Zimmermann survived the war. He returned to his home in Bavaria, married his childhood sweetheart, became a teacher. He had 3 children and 7 grandchildren. He died in 2003, at the age of 82, surrounded by family. He never knew that an American pilot had him in gunsight over Belgium and chose not to fire. He never knew that his face had haunted that pilot's dreams for 50 years. He never knew that his survival was not accidental but chosen, 2 seconds of hesitation that changed 2 lives across an unbridgeable distance. But perhaps it doesn't matter whether he knew. What matters is that one man saw another man and chose mercy when mercy was neither required nor expected nor easy. What matters is that the face in the gunsight was seen as a face, not a target. What matters is that sometimes, even in war, humanity survives. Not always. Not often. But sometimes. And James Harwell's 2-second hesitation was proof that the capacity for mercy, even brief, even costly, even complicated by all that came after, can endure even in the skies above war, even in the moment before death, even when every training and every instinct says to pull the trigger. That hesitation was not weakness. It was the thing that made him human. And that humanity, preserved and honored despite everything that tried to destroy it, is what remains long after the war has ended and the faces have faded and the choices have been made and lived with. It remains.